Saints threw a curveball. They picked the center, Cesar Ruiz, and a lot of people are unhappy. And I like walking people off of the ledge. It's what I do. So if you want to hear why this was such a great pick and the angle you need to be looking at it from, take a walk. So let's look at this into some context. Number one, from a standpoint of value. Now, the Saints were rumored to like Justin Jefferson. They liked Jalen Rager, and I'm pretty sure they wanted Kenneth Murray. They watched all three of those guys go in every single pick right before they came up to the selection. So when you're looking at a standpoint of you maybe just watched your number one and your number two receiver on your board go off, followed by your number two, maybe your number one linebacker go off the board, fans are asking for them to take their number three receiver, possibly take their number three linebacker, when you've got to think of a value standpoint where they took the number one center. So you can reach for your number three guard, or your number three linebacker, your number three receiver, or you can get the number one center. That's value. So just from that standpoint, the pick makes sense. But let's get into a little bit more logic. If you watch the last Vikings game, like I did, the one we lost in the playoffs, the one where Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter would flipped on the inside and we couldn't protect, and one of the culprits of not being able to protect was Larry Warford, then you understand that the Saints needed interior help. Number two, if you recognize that Drew Brees at 40 years of age no longer moves like Drew Brees at 32 years of age, you understand again the importance of interior pocket protection. Now, to make the Ruiz pick look even better, you need to combine it with the Emmanuel Sanders signing. Because if you look back again to some of our playoff losses over the last 3 years, the object of football is to do what? Score more points than your opponent. And while I enjoy defense, I love defense, the league is tilted towards offense. Defenders also don't know where receivers are going, whereas receivers know where they're going. So there's always going to be a slight tilt towards offense. Now you also have to think of it from the standpoint of Sean Payton being an offensive-minded coach with a very offensive-minded quarterback in Drew Brees, meaning that this team will always be offensive-driven. So when you look at it from that aspect, you go back to some of these losses, and what do you see? You see an offense unable to score points the way that they typically do. Now, granted, I do believe that the Saints still need a receiver. I do believe that they still need an additional weapon, an additional receiver. But when you combine this with Emmanuel Sanders, you still have Michael Thomas, you still have Jared Cook, you still have Alvin Kamara. Then you throw this in what could be competition for Warford to get a better offensive line product on the field. Suddenly, this team looks like it can score more points, or in simple, they've upgraded the offense from what it was last year to this point, and that's important for this team as a whole. You just need to score more points. It's not necessarily always about stopping points. It would be great. I would love to have the Baltimore Ravens 2000 defense. I would love to have the 49ers defense from the 2011-2012 season. Would love that. Unfortunately, those defenses are hard to come by, number one. And number two, it's hard to keep them together. But when you have an offensive-minded coach like Sean Payton, these picks begin to make a little bit more sense. Now, the problems for some of the games have started on the offensive line. When you look back to the 2017 season, we were doing fine until we got to the playoffs and we started to see injuries. And where did those injuries hit the hardest? offensive line. And I've talked about how playoff warfare starts in the trenches, starts on the defensive line, starts on the offensive line. That's where you give yourself the greatest chance. Skill position players are very important, highly important. But sometimes the best thing you can do is build up the lines on both sides of the ball that are closest to the ball. Sometimes those guys have the greatest impact. You want to know what's the best way to shut down a number one receiver outside of a number one corner? Get to the quarterback. Because if the quarterback is under pressure, he's not going to be able to deliver the ball to that number one receiver. So again, the Saints have done, I think, a very great job of improving the offense just with Ruiz and Emmanuel Sanders, and also bringing back Pete, because you could have gotten worse than Pete. So now you're looking at an upgrade to Warford, because the Saints are interested in possibly moving last year's center Eric McCoy over to guard. Now I hear the complaints. Eric McCoy was a great center last year. Don't mess that up. Eric McCoy played guard and center in college. And one of the easiest positions that the Saints have gotten production from is the center position. So the fact that he played well at center last year probably has more to do with the fact that it's not a hard position to step in and play for the Saints. But he offers scheme versatility in that the guy is 6'3", 315 pounds. He actually fits the size weight measurements the Saints have at guard. Now, it helped that you had Warford there last year, but kicking him over to guard at some point, and then Ruiz rounding out at the center position, suddenly that becomes almost as an elite of a strength as your outside tackles. Probably not as good, but then you've also got questionable health with Teron Armstead, which again, this helps even more, because if Armstead goes down and Pete has to kick out, usually that weakens your guard position considerably, right? But what if that versatility, you can then slide McCoy over to left guard, and then you put Warford in at right guard. Now there's still not very much of a weakness on the offensive line, so suddenly you do have some help there. You have depth there that I think is important to the overall continuity of the offense. The Saints want to score points. Now granted, I understand. I wanted those three players. I wanted the three players that got picked prior. But if you think back to when we got Ryan Ramczyk, you know what kind of worked out for us? Team traded up. They went and got Reuben Foster, 49ers in particular. Reuben Foster's already on another team. Ramczyk is a two-time All-Pro. Right? So sometimes these things have their own way of working out. And plenty of us had our issues with Kenneth Murray. We felt he was the best fit prototype size-wise, but we also had fears that he could turn to Stephon Anthony. So if you've looked over the past draft history and the history of the Saints with offensive line, they tend to get good production from offensive linemen. So you can almost argue that not having to pick a linebacker takes away some of that risk of what we know of the Saints' past as far as it pertains to linebacker and their hit rate on linebacker. So they actually came out with a much safer pick. A pick that is more likely to give them upside than wondering if linebacker. Now again, Kenneth Murray was, based on what I read, he was a much better prospect than Stephon Anthony and has lower bust potential. But again, Ruiz is a very good pick in the grand scheme of things. Now the other thing you have to take into account is the draft isn't over. Right? Saints still have the potential to go up and get prospects. Now, one thing you need to take into consideration, don't be surprised by this. You could either be looking back at a wide receiver or a corner right now, because Sean Payton laid out his draft kind of value, and he said that they would pay close attention to offensive line, they played close attention to cornerback, there was a ton of receivers, and then linebacker. So you still may not see them move up for a linebacker just yet. It's more likely that they may go in and target a cornerback or target a specific receiver, and then work out or take a look at the linebacker, since they worked out a litany of them, especially not worked out, but they interviewed a litany of the middle round linebackers. So they may again wait for a linebacker that they like, because the linebacker that's going to play, Saints only play two linebackers. So linebacker that's going to play, he's not going to get significant snaps, especially if Anzalone has a career year and Davis stays healthy. Then he's still got to probably try to beat out your other linebacker in Kiko Alonso, who granted is recovering from an ACL, but rookies don't come in and immediately push. You also have last year's, I think, 6th-round pick, 7th-round pick linebacker. He was injured. He's coming from his own injury, but he was also a good linebacker prospect that showed up early. So the Saints don't have to force this, and they have names like Alec Ogletree still out there at linebacker, that if the Saints are unable to come away with one, they can sign one in free agency. So without being too harsh on the pick, you have to think about collectively what it does. Drew Brees doesn't move as well in the pocket. You need to protect him. This helps. Saints were not happy with Warford's play. Sean Payton has already come out and said that Warford is going to have to compete. And when you have competition, the cream rises to the top. If you want to give it a grade, I would give it a B plus grade right now. And B plus. It becomes an A once you can add another threat to that. Saints come away with a legit receiver, a prospect that is good, that can contribute year one, even if it's just a role. Then it brings collectively in the improvement of the offense, then it would bring that grade higher. But it was not a stupid pick. It was not a dumb pick. It was a very intelligent pick. Come down out of the clouds. It's okay. The Saints made a smart move. A very smart move. Wasn't sexy. Wasn't sexy at all. I know we want the nice, sexy picks. I get it. Wasn't sexy at all. I wanted one too. Still want one. And the draft isn't over. But warfare, trench warfare, playoff games, they're won and lost in the trenches. The Saints got the number one center in the draft. The consensus number one center in the draft. It's going to work. Cool your nachos, fan your porridge. I love you today. I'll be here tomorrow. Take care.